Before you hear anything else, you need to hear the exact words he used. Hair burned into my memory, a perfect little brand of corporate condescension. He said, "We're streamlining, Diana, hair reducing overhead. Your role is, well, it's a bureaucratic formality we can absorb elsewhere." He said this to me over a pixelated video call, his face a smug, blurry mask from his corner office, the one with the view of the city I helped him build. "I'm Diana, and for the last 4 years I was the Chief Compliance Officer for Innovate Payments, a fintech startup that thought it was the next Stripe. They thought I was just a box to tick, a rubber stamp. They forgot that the ink in that stamp was my own blood, sweat, and a very specific, very personal certification that legally allowed them to exist in the European Union. They fired the woman whose name was on the license, so I did the only thing a good compliance officer would do. I complied with my professional duty. I notified the EU's regulatory body that Innovate Payments no longer had a certified data protection officer on staff. And just like that, with one single professionally worded email, I froze their access to their largest and most profitable market. This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about consequences. But before we get into the beautiful, beautiful consequences, do me a favor. If you've ever been made to feel small in a job you built, hit that like button and let me know in the comments that I'm not just screaming into the void. It helps to know you're not alone. The video call ended with a quiet click. No fireworks, no grand finale, just the abrupt blackness of a dead screen in my silent home office. Marcus Thorne, CEO and visionary, had logged off, probably already on his way to a celebratory lunch for successfully trimming the fat. I was the fat. My entire career, my 4 years of 80-hour weeks, my specialized knowledge that was the literal bedrock of their international operations, had just been categorized as overhead, a bureaucratic formality. The words echoed in the sudden, oppressive quiet of the room. I looked at my hands, resting on my matte black laptop. They were perfectly still, not a tremor. On the outside, I was a statue of professional composure. It's a mask you learn to wear so well in the corporate world that sometimes you forget you have it on. But inside, something had fractured. It wasn't a loud, shattering break. It was a deep, seismic crack, the kind that happens to a glacier just before a city-sized chunk of it calves off into the sea. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw the stupid, minimalist lamp off my stupid IKEA desk. The emotion that was rising in me wasn't hot, white rage. It was cold. It was the quiet, gathering cold of deep space, a feeling so immense and empty it had its own gravity. I stood up, my joints stiff, and walked from my office to the kitchen. The house felt alien, the familiar wooden floors creaking under my feet like a stranger was walking on them. I poured a glass of water, and it was only then that I saw the tremor. My hand was shaking, just slightly, sending tiny ripples across the surface of the water. The mask was slipping. Overhead. The word was an insult wrapped in corporate jargon. It implied I was a cost center, a drain, a necessary evil at best, and a disposable luxury at worst. It so fundamentally misunderstood what I did, what I was, that it felt like a form of erasure. They hadn't just fired me, they had declared that my function, my expertise was worthless. I leaned against the cool granite of the countertop, closed my eyes and let the memories flood in. You see, when the betrayal is that deep, your brain starts searching for the evidence you ignored, the red flags you painted green. It needs to make sense of the impossible, and my brain was a master archivist of slights and disrespect. I remembered the beginning, 4 years ago. Innovate Payments wasn't in a gleaming tower then. It was in a cramped, dusty co-working space that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Marcus was there, of course, with his unshakable charisma and a PowerPoint deck full of promises. He was selling a dream of frictionless global payments, but he had no idea how to navigate the thorny, treacherous world of international data law. That was my domain. I was the second employee, not a co-founder, mind you. That title, and the equity that came with it, was reserved for Marcus and his college buddy, who wrote the first few lines of shoddy code. I was just an employee, brought in to handle the paperwork. The paperwork was the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. To Marcus, it was a four-letter acronym that was getting in the way of his ambition. To me, it was Mount Everest. It was a complex, unforgiving piece of legislation that could bankrupt a company with a single misstep. We had no money for expensive consultants. It was just me, a laptop, and a bottomless pot of coffee. I spent 6 months, nights and weekends, blurring into a single continuous workday, building their compliance framework from the ground up. I wrote the data privacy policies. I mapped every single byte of user data, from the moment it was entered on a screen in Berlin to the second it was processed on a server in Dublin. I designed the security protocols, the breach notification procedures, the data subject access request workflows. I didn't just fill out forms. I built the entire legal and operational architecture that allowed an American startup to touch European money. I did it because I believed in the project, yes, but more than that, I did it because it was a fascinating, complex puzzle, and I am very, very good at puzzles. It was during that initial frantic period that I first saw the need for something better. The off-the-shelf compliance software we could barely afford was clunky, inefficient, and left massive gaps. It was like trying to perform surgery with a butter knife. So I started a side project. On my own time, on my own personal computer, I began to build a tool. I was a decent coder, a skill I'd picked up in college and kept sharp for fun. I started designing a lightweight, automated monitoring system. It would track data flows in real time, flag potential compliance issues before they became breaches, and generate the ridiculously complex reports the EU regulators demanded with a single click. It was elegant, it was efficient, and it was mine. I called it the Oracle, a little bit of a private joke. It saw everything. When it was functional, I presented it to Marcus. He was impressed, but in the way a king is impressed when a court jester teaches a dog a new trick. "Oh, that's clever, Diana. Very useful." He never asked about the code, the architecture, the intellectual property. He just assumed it, like my 80-hour weeks, belonged to the company. It was a tool Diana uses, part of the furniture. I let him believe it. It was a mistake born of loyalty, a mistake I would later be profoundly grateful for. My mind jumped forward to a year later. We were growing. We'd moved into a proper office. We'd hired more people. One of them was a kid named Leo. He was a junior data analyst, fresh out of university, with a brilliant mind trapped behind a crippling shyness. He was meticulous, observant, and terrified of his own shadow. Most of the sales bro types who now populated the office floor either ignored him or walked all over him. But I saw the spark. I saw the way his eyes lit up when we talked about data structures or encryption standards. I took him under my wing. I gave him small projects at first, then larger ones. I taught him how to read the complex tapestry of our data flows, how to spot anomalies, how to think like a compliance officer. I showed him the back end of the Oracle, teaching him how to interpret its outputs. He wasn't just my subordinate. He was my apprentice. He was the only other person in that entire company who truly understood the delicate, intricate machine I had built. I remembered one afternoon, Marcus stormed over to my desk, his face flushed with anger. A client had requested a full data audit, a standard but laborious process. Leo, in his eagerness to be thorough, had provided a log file that was a little too comprehensive, revealing an internal server naming convention that Marcus considered proprietary. It was a trivial mistake, a non-issue, but Marcus saw it as an act of incompetence that made him look bad. He was ready to fire Leo on the spot. He told me, "He's a liability. Get rid of him." I stood my ground. I stood between my CEO's volcanic ego and my terrified, pale-faced analyst. I said, "The mistake was mine, Marcus. I gave him the wrong instructions. I'll fix it. I'll handle the client." I spent the entire night rerunning the audit, reformatting the logs, and drafting a carefully worded email to the client that smoothed everything over. Leo kept his job. From that day on, his loyalty to me was absolute. It was a quiet bond, unspoken, but solid as steel. He saw me as his shield, and I saw him as the future, as proof that competence could still find a home in a company increasingly obsessed with image. My thoughts drifted to another memory, sharper and more painful. It was our Series B funding announcement. We'd secured $50 million. The office was buzzing. Investors and journalists were milling around. I was standing in the back, watching Marcus on a makeshift stage, basking in the flashbulbs. He was talking about the company's unwavering commitment to user trust and data security. He spoke of our robust, state-of-the-art compliance systems, as if he'd designed them himself during a weekend retreat in the Hamptons. An investor, a sharp woman from a big-name venture capital firm, had cornered me earlier, asking specific technical questions about our GDPR framework. We'd spoken for half an hour. She was deeply impressed. I saw her approach Marcus after his speech. I heard her say, "Your chief compliance officer is brilliant. She really knows her stuff. You're lucky to have her." Marcus just smiled, his $1 million smile, and said, "Thank you. We're very proud of the team I've built." The team I've built. He absorbed the credit like a black hole absorbs light. I wasn't a person. I was a feature of his success. My contribution, my name, was simply assimilated into his narrative. I stood there, invisible, a ghost in the machine I had created. I pushed myself off the counter, the water in the glass now still. All these moments, these little cuts, these casual dismissals, they weren't isolated incidents. They were a pattern. I had been so focused on the work, on building the perfect system, that I had failed to see the rot in the foundation of the company itself. I had mistaken their need for my skills as respect for my value. And now, the bill for that naivete had come due. My gaze fell upon a framed certificate on my office wall. It wasn't a university degree. It was plain, almost severe-looking, with the seal of the European Commission at the top. It was my official designation as a data protection officer. My name, Diana Allister, was printed in stark black ink. Below it, a registration number that tied me personally to the legal status of Innovate Payments. I remembered the final interview for that certification, a video call with a stern but fair regulator from the Irish Data Protection Commission, our chosen lead authority in the EU. He had drilled me for 2 hours on the most obscure points of the law. At the end, he had leaned into his camera and said, with no hint of a smile, "This is a personal responsibility, Miss Allister. The company gets the license to operate, but your name is the guarantee. The integrity of their EU operations rests on your personal and professional integrity." The words came back to me now, not as a burden, but as a key, a weapon. They thought my role was a formality. They had forgotten that the formality was a legal requirement, and the requirement had a name. My name. The coldness inside me began to change. The vast, empty feeling was gone, replaced by something solid. It was the hard, dense certainty of a plan falling into place. It was the birth of resolve. And then, as if on cue, my personal phone buzzed on the counter. A text message. It was from Leo. The message was short, a flare sent up from behind enemy lines. "They just locked me out of the Oracle admin panel. They're trying to give Chloe access." Chloe? Chloe was Marcus's niece. She had a marketing degree and an Instagram account full of yoga poses in exotic locations. She had been hired a month ago as a brand evangelist. I had seen her in the office kitchen trying to figure out how the coffee machine worked. Another message from Leo appeared. "She's asking what a data subject access request is." "Diana, what's happening?" That was it. That was the final push. The thought of Chloe, with her complete and utter lack of qualifications, being given the keys to my kingdom, to the sensitive data of 25 million European citizens, it wasn't just an insult to me anymore. It was a 5-alarm fire, a catastrophe in the making. My personal feelings of betrayal suddenly felt small, petty. This was now about professional duty. It was about protecting the system I had built from the people who were about to burn it to the ground. It wasn't about revenge. It was about containment. The first step in any crisis is to control your breathing. I took a long, slow breath, held it, and let it out. The anger, the shock, the years of accumulated frustration, I packed them all down into a small, dense box in the corner of my mind. They could be unpacked later. Right now, I needed clarity. I needed to move from being the victim to being the architect of the response. The plan that had been a nebulous feeling a moment ago began to crystallize, its edges becoming sharp and clear. It was a plan built on foresight, leverage, and the fatal arrogance of my former employer. They thought they had cut me out. They didn't realize they had just amputated their own brain. My first move wasn't to call a lawyer or to fire off an angry email to Marcus. It was to walk back to my home office and power on my other laptop, my personal one, the one the company didn't know about. On it was the true heart of the Oracle. You see, when I integrated the Oracle into the company's systems, I was clever. I told Marcus that for me to fulfill my legal duties as DPO, I needed an unalterable audit log, one that was completely independent of the company's internal network and administrators. I framed it as a liability shield for him. If there was ever a dispute, he could point to a system that not even he could tamper with. He loved it. It sounded like more security, more jargon he could use with investors. He agreed without a second thought, never understanding the strategic implication. The core logging and reporting module of the Oracle didn't run on their servers. It ran on a private, encrypted cloud instance that I paid for myself. They had access to the user interface, the dashboard. I had the keys to the engine room, and I had built in a fail-safe. A little piece of code I called the Alistair protocol. It was a simple, elegant dead man's switch. My DPO credentials were a primary key in the system. The protocol stated that if my specific credentials were ever revoked from the system's admin list, as they surely just had been, and if that revocation was not preceded by a specific digitally signed handoff sequence initiated by me, the system would assume a hostile takeover or a security breach. It was programmed to do one thing in that event: wall itself off from the company's network, generate a complete, final, top-to-bottom compliance and activity status report for the preceding 24 hours, encrypt it, and send it to a secure anonymous email address that only I controlled. As Leo was texting me about being locked out, a notification had quietly popped up on my personal laptop. Alistair protocol initiated. Final report generated and sent. I opened the email. There it was, a perfect time-stamped snapshot of the entire system at the exact moment of my termination. Clean, irrefutable, and completely in my possession. It was my insurance policy, and the premium had just been paid in full. Next, I needed my allies. The first call was to my lawyer, not a corporate litigator, but a woman named Evelyn Reed, a boutique specialist in international data law and intellectual property. I'd put her on a small personal retainer 2 years ago, after the Series B funding incident. It was a move born of pure paranoia at the time, a feeling that one day I would need someone in my corner who understood the specific weapons I had at my disposal. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. I laid out the situation for her in calm, precise terms. The firing, my role as the registered DPO, the unqualified replacement, the Oracle and its independent architecture. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought for a second she might be overwhelmed. Then I heard a low chuckle. "Oh, Diana," she said, her voice rich with the sound of a predator spotting a wounded gazelle. "Oh, this is not a termination. This is a gift." She began to speak, and the words were music. "Willful violation of GDPR, Article 37. Failure to appoint a qualified DPO. Potential for maximum and demonstrative fines, 4% of global annual turnover, and the IP for the Oracle. You never signed a work-for-hire agreement that explicitly covered software developed on your own time and equipment." I said no, I never did. Her laugh was louder this time. It was beautiful. The second ally I needed to manage was Leo. He was my man on the inside, but he was also vulnerable. I knew the pressure he would be under. I replied to his frantic texts. My message was carefully worded. "Leo, I am no longer with the company. I cannot advise you on internal matters. However, I can remind you of your job description. You are a data analyst. You are not a data protection officer. Do not perform duties for which you are not qualified or compensated. Document every request you receive. Forward a copy of those requests to this email address. Be polite, be helpful, but do not, under any circumstances, attempt to fix this. It is not your responsibility. I was giving him a shield. I was giving him a legal position to stand on when the chaos began. I was also turning him into my own, perfect, real-time intelligence-gathering machine. He replied almost instantly. A single word. Understood. Now for the core of the plan, the hidden leverage, the part that Marcus and his board of yes-men had never bothered to understand. I opened my browser and navigated to the official web portal of the European Data Protection Board. It was a clunky, government-issue website, all bland blues and grays, but to me it was the most beautiful site on the internet. I logged in with my personal DPO credentials. My access was still active. They had cut me off from the company's Slack channel and my email, but they hadn't thought to revoke my access to the regulatory body that governed their existence. An amateur mistake, a fatal one. I navigated to the section for registered entities. I found Innovate Payments Inc., and next to it the name of the designated data protection officer, Diana Allister. I want you to understand how critical this is. In the EU, under GDPR, for a company of our size and type, a DPO isn't just a nice-to-have. It's a legal mandate. It's like having a pilot in the cockpit of a 747. You can't just tell the passengers you've streamlined the role and let the flight attendant have a go at the controls. The DPO is the designated point of contact for the regulators. They are personally responsible for overseeing the company's data processing strategy, and their qualifications are not a suggestion. The law requires they have expert knowledge of data protection law and practices. Chloe, the brand evangelist, had expert knowledge of Instagram filters and avocado toast. This is where I have to use a small inaccuracy to make the stakes absolutely clear for you. Think of it less like a simple registration and more like a personal license. My specific certified name was the key that allowed their engine to run in Europe. Without a licensed driver in the seat, the car wasn't legally allowed on the road, and they had just thrown the driver out and handed the keys to someone who didn't know the brake from the accelerator. My finger hovered over the button on the screen. Update DPO status. It was so simple, so quiet. All the drama, all the shouting and the politics in that office, and it all came down to a single click on a forgotten government website. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, the phrase already starting to feel like a necessary mantra. It was about enforcing the rules. I was a compliance officer. This was the ultimate act of compliance. I clicked the button. A form appeared. Reason for change. I selected the drop-down menu. Resignation of DPO. Incapacity of DPO. Termination of DPO's employment. I selected the last one. I typed in the effective date and time. It was the time Marcus had ended our call. I attached a single PDF document, the official termination letter they had emailed me just an hour ago. My finger moved to the submit button. For a moment I paused. I thought about the chaos this would unleash. The panic, the frantic calls, the collapse of a system I had painstakingly built. A flicker of something, pity, regret, stirred in me. Then I remembered the words, a bureaucratic formality, and I clicked the button. A small green confirmation box appeared. Your notification has been received and is being processed. It was done. The first domino had fallen, and it had fallen in complete and utter silence. The silent coup began not with a bang but with a simple web form. The moment I clicked Submit on the EU portal, a series of automated flags were raised within the regulatory system. It was a digital tripwire, one I knew existed because I had studied the Commission's internal procedures as part of my certification. For a company of our scale, processing millions of transactions and handling the data of millions of EU citizens, the absence of a registered DPO wasn't a clerical issue to be addressed next week. It was a critical, red alert failure. It was the equivalent of a nuclear power plant suddenly reporting that its chief safety engineer had been fired and replaced by the cafeteria worker. I didn't have to wait long. The beauty of a system built by meticulous, rule-obsessed Germans and administered by equally meticulous, rule-obsessed Irish regulators is its brutal efficiency. While Marcus was likely clinking glasses with his leadership team, celebrating their cost-cutting genius, the system was already working. An automated notification would have been fired off to their primary payment gateway, the massive financial institution that physically processed every euro that flowed into Innovate payments. The notification would have been simple and non-negotiable. Compliance hold pending DPO verification for Innovate Payments Inc. My phone buzzed. It was Leo. His text was a string of panicked sentences. Diana, all EU transactions just stopped. The payment gateway is returning a compliance hold error. I checked the logs. It's a full freeze. Nothing in or out. I smiled. It was a thin, tight smile, but it was a smile. It was working faster than I'd even anticipated. Another text from Leo. Marcus is on a call with the payment processor. He's screaming. I can hear him from my desk. The processor is telling him the hold was initiated by the EDPB and is non-negotiable until the compliance flag is cleared by the Commission directly. They can't override it. My smile widened. Of course they couldn't. Trying to override a hold from the European Data Protection Board was like asking a bank teller to ignore a direct order from the Treasury. It doesn't happen. Then came the message I was waiting for, the one that confirmed the exquisite, beautiful ignorance at the heart of the company. Leo's next text, Chloe just came to my desk. She asked me if I knew how to reboot the GDPR. She's not joking. She literally asked me that. I had to read that one twice to fully appreciate its perfection. Reboot the GDPR. As if it were a faulty modem. As if the entire legal framework of data privacy for a continent of 450 million people was a piece of software that could be turned off and on again. This was who they had entrusted with my life's work. This was their streamlined solution. The panic must have been metastasizing through the office like a virus. Leo's updates became a running commentary of a corporate nervous breakdown. Marcus is off the call. His face is sheet white. He's storming around the office asking where the compliance files are. The physical ones. I wanted to laugh. The physical files. He was looking for a magic binder, a single book of spells that would fix this. The physical files were 12 filing cabinets of meticulously organized documentation in my office. My office that, according to the termination letter, I was forbidden from entering. The office whose keys had been taken from me. They had locked themselves out of their own escape route. Then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I never thought I would see again. Marcus Thorne. I watched it ring, the vibration buzzing on my kitchen counter. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. He was following the script I had written for him in my head. I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately, and again. The sheer frantic persistence was a measure of his terror. On the fourth call, I decided to answer. I took a slow breath, smoothed my voice into a placid, neutral tone, and pressed the green icon. Diana, I said, as if I were answering a call from the dry cleaner. His voice was a strained, ragged thing, a mix of fury and raw panic. What did you do? He spat. The question was an accusation, not an inquiry. I did, I said. My voice calm. Marcus, you're the one who terminated my employment. I'm not sure what I could have possibly done in the last 90 minutes from my home office. Don't play games with me, Diana. The EU gateway is frozen. They're talking about a compliance hold. They're mentioning the DPO. This has your name written all over it. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. I could hear his labored breathing. I could picture him in his glass-walled office. Tie loosened, face blotchy with rage, his world crumbling around him. It seems, I said, my voice as cool and clear as water, that there might be an issue with your DPO registration. You should probably have your current DPO look into that. There was a pause, a beautiful, deafening silence. He had no answer, because the current DPO was his niece, who was at that moment probably Googling how to reboot Europe. He had walked directly into the elegant, simple trap I had laid, and the door had just snapped shut behind him. The power shift began, as it always does, with the clients. The blood in the water attracts the sharks. Innovate Payments hadn't just built a platform, they had made promises. Promises of stability, security, and seamless operation. Promises that I, Diana Allister, had personally underwritten with my name and my reputation. The first call came from a number I knew by heart. It was Hans Richter, the notoriously meticulous CEO of Clausen, a massive German e-commerce giant. They were our biggest European client, responsible for nearly 30% of our transaction volume in the region. Richter was a man who valued precision above all else. He had grilled me for a full day before signing their contract, not his technical team, me. He wanted to look the person responsible for his data's safety in the eye. Diana, his voice was curt, no pleasantries. What is happening at your company? My entire payment system is frozen. The automated alert from the gateway called it a regulatory compliance failure. This is not acceptable. I didn't gloat. I didn't say I told you so. I simply stated the fact. Hans, I am so sorry you're experiencing this disruption. However, as of this morning, I am no longer with Innovate Payments. There was a beat of silence on the line. I could hear the gears turning in his sharp, pragmatic mind. He wasn't processing my departure. He was processing the consequences. You are not with them, he asked, his tone shifting from anger to alarm. Then who is managing their compliance? Who is their DPO? That, Hans, is an excellent question that you should ask Marcus Thorne. I think you'll find the answer illuminating. He didn't need any more details. He understood immediately. The person he trusted, the guarantee, was gone. The entire structure was hollow. Diana, he said, his voice now firm, decisive. Thank you for your candor. This is a material breach of our service level agreement. I am putting my legal team on it now. One more thing. Wherever you land, let me know. Clausen's business will follow you. He hung up. That was the sound of a $10 million a year contract vaporizing. It was the first major crack in the dam, and I knew the flood was coming. Meanwhile, Marcus was still on the line with me, his panic escalating into a desperate, pleading auction. His initial rage had burned out, leaving behind the pathetic, whimpering core of a man who had lost control. Diana, listen to me, he said, his voice suddenly slick with false sincerity. This is all a mistake, a misunderstanding. There was a communication breakdown. We can fix this. He was trying to rewrite history in real time. I just listened, letting him spin his web of lies. We value you, Diana. You know that. You're a crucial part of this team. He had called me overhead not 2 hours ago. The whiplash was dizzying. Then came the offer. Name your price. Seriously. We'll tear up the termination notice. Your old job back. A 20% raise. No, 50%. A new title. Chief Strategy Officer. You can have a board seat. Whatever you want. Just make the call. Call them off. Tell them it was a mistake. It was almost tragic. He still believed I was a functionary, a switchboard operator, who could just call the big scary government and tell them to stand down. He fundamentally did not understand the nature of the situation. He thought it was a negotiation. It was a funeral. I let him finish his frantic, pathetic sales pitch. I waited until all the air was out of him, until there was nothing left but his ragged, hopeful breathing on the line. Then I spoke, and my voice was devoid of all emotion. Marcus, I said, it's a simple matter. You told me my role was a bureaucratic formality. You streamlined it. You reduced the overhead. It seems the European Union's regulatory bodies disagree with your assessment of my value, but the decision was yours. You made your choice, and choices have consequences. The final confrontation wasn't a confrontation at all. It was an execution, and I wasn't the one holding the axe. The system was. Marcus made one last, desperate plea. You have to fix this, Diana, he yelled, his voice cracking. It was an order born of pure terror. You work for me. I almost corrected him, but decided to let him live with that particular delusion for a moment longer. Then I delivered the final, quiet blow. I don't work for you anymore, Marcus. You made sure of that. You made sure of that. According to this legally binding termination letter, I am no longer an employee, officer, or representative of Innovate Payments. I have no authority to speak to regulators on your company's behalf. To do so would be a legal misrepresentation. You need your currently registered data protection officer to handle that. He has to be the one to interface with the commission. A long pause stretched across the line. I knew he was frozen, trapped by his own stupid nepotistic decision. Who did you say that was again, Marcus? Chloe. I believe she has a wonderful Instagram presence. I'm sure the regulators in Dublin will be very impressed with her portfolio of sunset yoga photos. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a king realizing he's naked, his castle is on fire, and he's handed the only bucket of water to the court jester. I have one piece of advice for you, Marcus, I said, my voice softening just a fraction, a surgeon's momentary pity for the tissue she is about to cut. Hire a very good lawyer, someone who specializes in GDPR fines and corporate negligence. You're going to need them. Then I hung up. I blocked his number. It was over. The aftermath was a slow, beautiful implosion, which I observed from a safe distance through Leo's updates and the industry press. The EU transaction freeze lasted for 10 agonizing days. 10 days of zero revenue from their largest market. The regulators, as I knew they would, were in no hurry. Use a raison d'eures for one. They launched a full investigation, not just into the DPO issue, but into the company's entire data handling protocol, now that it was under scrutiny. They found dozens of minor infractions that my constant vigilance had kept in check, but which had now been exposed. The fine, when it came, was breathtaking. 8 figures. 4% of their global turnover from the previous fiscal year, the maximum allowable penalty. It was a death sentence. The news of the fine, combined with the public exit of Clausen and 2 other major clients who followed suit, shattered investor confidence. The board, the same board that had likely rubber-stamped my firing, convened an emergency meeting. Marcus Thorne was unceremoniously fired. His vision had led them off a cliff. Chloe was let go the same day, a quiet, embarrassing footnote in the disaster. Innovate Payments, once a celebrated fintech unicorn, was crippled. Within 3 months, its remaining assets were sold for pennies on the dollar to a large, boring, traditional bank, the very kind of institution Marcus had always mocked. They were absorbed, erased, their brand disappearing into the beige bureaucracy they had despised. 6 months after the video call that was supposed to end my career, I sat in a new office. It was bright, airy, and filled with light. The name on the glass door was simple: Alistair Compliance and Strategy. The space wasn't as large as the Innovate Payments headquarters, but it was all mine. My first and anchor client was, of course, Clausen. Hans Richter had been true to his word. My second client was a promising new health tech firm that needed to build a GDPR framework from scratch. My third was a venture capital firm that now retained me to perform compliance due diligence on any potential tech investments, a direct result of the Innovate Payments debacle. They were paying me to prevent them from ever investing in a company run by a Marcus Thorne again. Across the large central desk from me sat Leo. He wasn't a junior analyst anymore. He was my director of analytics. The shy, hesitant kid was gone, replaced by a confident, sharp young man who had found his footing. We weren't looking at spreadsheets. We were looking at a blueprint, a system architecture diagram on a massive monitor. On it was the next generation of the Oracle, Oracle 2.0. We were rebuilding it as a subscription-based software-as-a-service platform, a turnkey compliance solution for any company wanting to do business in Europe. The intellectual property was, as my lawyer Evelyn had gleefully confirmed, entirely and indisputably mine. I had never signed it over. They had taken my work for granted, and in doing so they had let me walk out the door with the crown jewels. My bureaucratic formality was about to become the foundation of my own empire. Some people might call what I did revenge, and maybe in that small, dense box in my mind where I keep my anger, there's a part of it that was. But as I sit here now, in my own office, building my own future, I can tell you with absolute certainty that it was never about retribution. It was about restoration. It was about restoring the fundamental principle that competence has value, that expertise matters, that the people who build the foundation are not disposable. They saw me as a line item on a budget, a piece of overhead to be cut. They failed to understand that some overhead is load-bearing. You don't streamline a pillar that's holding up the roof. You don't fire the person whose name is on the deed and expect to keep the house. So here is the moral of the story, the lesson I learned in the quiet aftermath of their noisy collapse. Your dedication, your expertise, your willingness to work those 80-hour weeks, they will mistake that for loyalty to them. But you must never make that mistake yourself. Your ultimate loyalty must be to the work itself, to the integrity of your craft, to the standards you set, because they can fire you from a job. They can lock you out of an office. They can take away your title, but they cannot fire you from being who you are. They cannot take away your knowledge. They cannot erase your competence. The moment they mistake your value for a cost is the moment they hand you all the power. You just have to be prepared, calm and ready to send the invoice. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased in your career, tell me your story in the comments below. It's important to know we're not alone in these battles. And if this story gave you even a little bit of satisfaction, a little bit of hope that competence eventually wins, then do me a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are many more stories to tell.